Welcome, and thank you for joining this webinar on adapting the graduation approach to people with disabilities. Just a few housekeeping rules before we get started. After the presentation, you will have the opportunity to ask questions to the panelists, but you can start sending us some of your questions as of now via the webcast. Please also send us your name as well as the name of the organization that you're representing. And also, as a housekeeping rule, please do make sure that you are muted unless you are speaking. Leading our webinar today, our speakers are Stephen Wallen and Hébert Artus from Fonkoze, Florie Bielsa from Trickle Up, and Mohamed Fazal from the Pakistan Poverty Alleviation Fund, or PPAF. My name is Melissa Victor, and I'm a financial sector analyst at CGAP. I will be moderating this webinar today, along with my colleague, Aude de Montesquieu. Just a quick note about CGAP. CGAP is a global partnership of 34 leading development organizations housed at the World Bank. Our mission is to improve the lives of the poor by spurring innovations and advancing knowledge and solutions that promote responsible, sustainable, and inclusive financial markets. CGAP became involved in the graduation program as we realized that standard microcredit programs were not reaching the extreme poor, who needed a more holistic intervention. In the mid-2000s, CGAP partnered with the Ford Foundation to explore how to extend financial access to poor and more vulnerable households than those that were traditionally reached by microfinance. In 2006, we started the CGAP Ford Foundation graduation program to test and adapt BRAC's Targeting the Ultra-Poor program, which is a carefully sequenced intervention. 10 pilots were launched in 8 countries involving a broad range of partners and an extensive research effort to test the universality of the graduation approach. The graduation approach, as we know it today, is a time-bound intervention delivered at the household level for about 18 to 36 months, and deliberately targeting the extreme poor, which are either those under $1.90 per day line and or those identified as the poorest or most vulnerable and marginalized. It's holistic in order to tackle the multifaceted constraints of extreme poverty. It offers a big push based on the idea that a large investment to kickstart an economic activity will really make a meaningful change. It facilitates access to a wider social protection regime and formal or semi-formal financial services as a way to build resilience, deepen economic inclusion, and continue upward progress. Rigorous impact evaluations have shown that graduation reliably results in gains in income, consumption, food security, assets, and reported well-being for participating households. Today, nearly 60 second-generation graduation programs are now being implemented in 37 countries, 1/3 of these by governments, typically as part of their national social protection strategies. Across the world, leading organizations and governments are exploring several permutations of the approach, most particularly to adapt graduation to additional vulnerable segments such as refugees, extreme poor urban households, disadvantaged youth, as well as people with disabilities, which is the topic of our webinar today. We have the opportunity today to learn from 3 main organizations which are implementing graduation programs specifically targeting people with disabilities. Please join me in welcoming our first panelists for today, Stephen Wallen and Hébert Artus from Fonkoze. Stephen is currently the Communications and Learning Officer for Fonkoze's Chemin la Vie Meilleure, or Pathway to a Better Life, which is Fonkoze's graduation program for the ultra-poor being implemented in Haiti. Stephen is also the author of the recently published book, To Full the Rain, Haiti's Poor and Their Pathway to a Better Life. Hébert is the Program Assistant Director at Fonkoze. He started working for the CLM program in 2006 as one of the case managers hired for the original pilot. In 2010, Hébert became a regional director for the program and is now the Program's Assistant Director. He's an economist and social worker by training. Stephen and Hébert, over to you.
Good morning, Melissa, and thank you. Good morning, everyone. We're very grateful to be able to join you this morning and to be part of this sharing of our experience and of the experience of others. Could we go to the next slide? Just to start with some very general facts about our CLM program. We think of it as a close replication of the BRAC TUP program involving 18 months of close accompaniment. We've had just over 5,000 graduates over the past 10 years and had a consistent graduation rate of just about 96%. Could we go to the next slide, please? A few years ago, we were offered the chance to pilot an adaptation of the program for ultra persons with disabilities. We were originally approached by Haiti's Secretary of State for the integration of persons with disabilities who had received a grant from Texas Christian University, and he decided to use that grant to try and experiment with us. Together, we selected 30 individuals with disabilities and basically did our regular program, except that we used a tailored approach to savings that had been designed at TCU to not involve a saver having to go to a branch or having to travel in order to save. Could we go to the next slide? We were impressed with the results of the program, both socially, psychologically, and economically. Participants reported that their number of friendships more than tripled and that their participation in community meetings almost doubled. They reported an increased number of meals per day by almost half a meal, and they were on average able to double the value of the assets we transferred to them in the course of their time with us. Yeah, could we go to the next slide, please? We faced some operational challenges working with the population with disabilities. They were much more widely dispersed than the people we normally work with. Normally, we would take all the ultra-poor persons that we find in the neighborhood, targeting only those with disabilities. And so transportation became difficult and expensive. The Haitian government does a very good job, in a way, of making services and adaptive materials available. That is, persons with disabilities can get wheelchairs, crutches. The problem is they need to know how to get them, and they need to get to the places that they're being distributed. So the people that we worked with in the countryside, in fact, had no access at all. That was an important challenge for us, facilitating that access. And then finally, I would say that it's really important to understand how little accessibility is built into the infrastructure in Haiti, especially in the countryside. So especially for those who have mobility issues, it's very difficult to get out of one's own yard, out of one's own house, and into the larger world. Could we go to the next slide, please? We learned a tremendous amount from this program. We discovered that the approach works with few adaptations. We had originally thought that we would need to learn a whole new set of income-generating activities and it was just not true. The people we worked with wanted to and were generally able to develop the same activities that we are already used to transferring. We learned that for many of the people we worked with, integrating family members in the process early on could be decisive, because there would be parts of the work that they weren't able to do, but they could do if they had close collaboration within their household. We learned that we had to spend a lot more money and time on transportation, both to facilitate access to medical care, but also to bring participants together for trainings and other kinds of meetings. And so we learned we had to reduce the case manager's caseload. He or she can't get to as many households as those that work in our normal program can, and that means more cost. We also learned we had to work more extensively and conscientiously around medical follow-up. The care in this part of Haiti is available, but you have to get to it and you have to know about it. And it's very difficult for a person with disabilities, let alone, anyone who's extremely poor, but especially for those with disabilities to get to it. Could we go to the next slide, please? The next steps for us are clear, and we've taken one of them already. We had originally avoided integrating persons with disabilities into our CLM cohorts because we thought the program wasn't appropriate. It wouldn't work for them. We've corrected that misconception, and we now fully integrate any person with disabilities who's poor enough for the program into our regular cohorts. But we still think it's important to have separate cohorts exclusively for persons with disabilities, if only because in the areas of the country we've already passed through, we won't have a chance to integrate them into regular cohorts, but also because we think there's still a lot of learning we need to do. Could we go to the next slide? That's really all we have to say. We want to say thank you, or merci, as we stay here in Haiti.
Thank you, Stephen, for this presentation. We will now welcome Flory Bialsa from Trickle Up. Flory is the Monitoring and Evaluation Coordinator for Trickle Up in Latin America. She has been working for the last 5 years, producing evidences about graduation, developing a digital M&E system, indicators, tools, and using ICT4D with the different graduation projects that Trickle Up is implementing in Guatemala, Nicaragua, Mexico, and Paraguay, with indigenous women, young women, and people with disabilities. Flory, over to you.
Thank you, Melissa. Good morning, everyone. Thank you also to the Trickle Up for the opportunity to speak about graduation and people with disabilities and share this morning our learnings and questions between organizations. So today I'm going to speak about the lessons from Trickle Up adaptation and implementation of the graduation approach with people with disabilities. Could we go to the next slide? Since 2010, we have been working with 826 households with people with disabilities, and we did it through different kind of projects. First of all, we started in Guatemala in 2010 with an intentional project only for people with disabilities. This project was called Micro Enterprise Opportunities for People with Disabilities, and it was a huge opportunity for us to learn on how to adapt graduation to people with disabilities. Based on that learnings, we decided to work on an inclusive way, and in our graduation project, we always include at least 10% of people with disabilities. In Nicaragua, we recently finalized a project where we integrate graduation approach and community-based inclusive development model, a model promoted by United Nations, and in this case also by CBN, our partner in that project. Then in Guatemala, we are working on a project which is children with disabilities. This project is called Alliance for Rural Inclusion, because we found that the children with disabilities in rural areas have many different kind of needs in education, health, and of course, economical issue in the household. And in Paraguay and Mexico, we are working with our partners on inclusive approach, so including people with disabilities in the different projects with women and indigenous people. Could we go to the next slide? I think there was a slide before. No? No. Okay. So the slide before was about project participant profile. Just a few data. 52% are women, and well, I'm going to speak about the profile of the people with disabilities. So 52% are women, and they are quite young because they have 18 years old on average. And in households with people with disabilities, 38% of the direct participants are people with disabilities, but in 62% we have to work with caregivers. I think that education attainment is quite worrying, because we have 47% of people literated, and only 12% of people with disabilities finish primary school. We work with different kinds of disabilities, mainly physical disabilities, intellectual disabilities, sensorial disabilities. And something important for us is about economical contribution. At the beginning, only 9% of people with disabilities told they always or fairly often contribute economically to the household expense. So this is an important barrier for them. They don't have access to activities to generate income. Okay, so now I'm going to speak about the lessons from the implementation and about this project we had in Nicaragua, where we pilot jointly graduation approach and community-based inclusive development model. One of our learning is these models are compatible, and in a short time it's possible to achieve an effective and sustainable economical inclusion of people with disabilities based on their micro-enterprise and their saving groups. Of course, the income generated allows the people with disabilities and their family to address health and educational expenses and buy assets. And people with disabilities and their caregivers are empowered as local economical actors. They increase their self-esteem, and the project was very important for us, and because it was also in alignment with right approach and not a medical approach. In ARI project, this project with children with disabilities, 6 months after seed capital disbursement, we already observed an important increase of the working capital. The participants started with $158 of seed capital, and 6 months after, they already had $250 of working capital. And they also were able to save $30. And in coordination with different institutions, we were able to address main health issues of the children. Could we go to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, about the opportunities and challenges we are facing. First of all, speaking about opportunities, each NGO who accepts the challenge of working with people with disabilities say the same. They speak about the huge human and organizational learnings they got after the experience. And also, you don't need to be an expert, an expert NGO to work with people with disabilities. You can learn and while you are working with them. People with disabilities, and mostly in rural context, used to be excluded from social programs. So when you are taking them into account, their involvement is higher than any other target group. It's part of our learning also. When people with disabilities improve their livelihood activities, we also observe that the household and the community economies increase. And through empowerment, we also observe an increase of the access to basic rights and services. For us, it's more effective to work in an inclusive way, including people with disabilities in regular projects with women, with young women, because it's more effective and you achieve a higher social and economical impact. About challenges, the first challenges are discrimination, isolation, invisibility, lack of self-confidence of the people with disabilities. These are the first barriers to be addressed. And you have to be ready to be learning constantly and be flexible to adapt the project to people with a wide range of disabilities and needs. And as Fonkoze was saying, there is dispersion of people with disabilities in rural areas, so that means higher costs for coaching. Could we go to the next slide? Okay, so now some strategies for scaling up graduation with people with disabilities. For example, in Paraguay, we are working an inclusive graduation program for 3,800 indigenous and farmers participants, including people with disabilities, and we are working with governmental institutions. So working with social protection governmental programs is an excellent strategy to scale. In Nicaragua, the project I spoke about just a little bit before, this project was also with the National Program of Social Protection for People with Disabilities. And there, our next step to scale is creating a network of organizations for people with disabilities interested in replicate and scale graduation and community-based inclusive development model with the involvement of the government. Disseminations of results and learning is a very good way to achieve a positive and big impact and create new partnerships to scale. On the right side of the slide, please, you can find two links of our manual called Disability, Poverty and Livelihoods. The first link is our Spanish version, the last version including the learnings from Nicaragua. And on the second link, you will find an English version, and soon we have to update this English manual. Okay, I'm going to go to the thank you. So thank you for your attention. Here you can find my contact information, and it will be a pleasure to answer your questions.
Thank you, Flory, for this presentation. To those who are now joining, please note we will have the PowerPoints available to you after the webinar. Now we're turning to Mohammed Fazal from the Pakistan Poverty Alleviation Fund. Mohammed has been working in the development and humanitarian sector for around 20 years with different national and international agencies such as Plan International, UNDP, Community World Service Asia, and Civil Society HID program. Prior to joining PPAF, he worked on designing and managing programs related to social inclusion of people with disabilities and inclusive development in Punjab and northern areas of Pakistan, projects which were funded by Savers International, DFID, and Life for Work. Mohammed, over to you now.
Thank you very much, Melissa, and good morning, everybody. Before moving to my presentation about mainstreaming of people with disabilities in poverty graduation, I would just briefly highlight about PPAF, Pakistan Poverty Alleviation Fund. Melissa, would you move to next? Okay. Pakistan Poverty Alleviation Fund is a lead national apex agency that has presence across Pakistan, working through 130 partner organizations and with over 500,000 community institutions. It has a very strategized poverty graduation strategy. Next, please. Okay. Our our vision, mission, and program strategies are driven and guided by our core values. And if you see, inclusion is on the forefront of all of our 5 core values. And this inclusion is basically inclusion of all marginalized and vulnerable groups, including people with disabilities. And these values also drive and guide our theory of change, which includes social mobilization and integrated development strategies that include social, economic, and environmental program interventions, and then private and public investment. And then again, inclusion is cross-cutting in all the strategies or of theory of change that result in empowered communities and reduced poverty. Okay. This slide tells us about our poverty graduation approach. PPF has strategized its program interventions through targeted package of interventions for people, ultra poor and vulnerable and poor persons, having different bands of poverty scorecard. For instance, people who are having poverty scorecard 0 to 16, they are supported with cash transfer through government-funded social protection program. In Pakistan, we have Benazir income support program, through which people ultra poor having poverty scorecard 0 to 16, they receive support, financial support. And then people having up to poverty scorecard 23, they are supported with PPAF's assets and livelihood interventions. And these livelihood interventions basically include transfer of productive assets, vocational and livelihood skills training, market linkages, support, and enterprise development training, etc., etc. And when people graduate from this band to the next band, then they are supported with, and people, and they have a poverty scorecard up to 40, then they are supported with interest-free loans through PPF program, and that helps them to establish their micro enterprise. And then once they move to the next level and they have poverty scorecard up to 100, then they are linked to PPF's sister concern, Pakistan Microfinance Insurance Company, to access regular microfinance for expansion of their enterprises and income generation activities. So ever since PPF has embarked on inclusive development and inclusive programs, people with disabilities are mainstream in all these poverty graduation strategies and all these poverty graduation bands. Yes, Melissa. Okay, now the mainstreaming process, I will just briefly highlight that when PPF embarked on inclusion of and mainstreaming of people with disability, it first started mainstreaming of people with disability in its implementation framework of all the programs. And then it started providing nurturing support to people with disability. And also the community resource person, basically, who are local resource person available at community level, they are also provided with capacity development support on inclusive development to create, so that an enabling environment for people with disability is created at community level. And then monitoring, evaluation, and progress reporting also focused on collecting disaggregated data that also included age, gender, and disability-related data, so that inclusion of people with disabilities properly tracked at all levels. And then the community institutions, the community organizations, village organizations, and third-tier local support organizations, they have also been sensitized and trained to ensure inclusion of people with disability in community development and village development planning process. Yes. Next. Okay, the nurturing support to PWDs is basically provided through PPF's partner organizations, community institutions, and disabled people organizations. With partner organizations, we have regular programs, and people with disabilities basically are mainstream in the regular programs. And the community institutions, I have already explained that they are sensitized and capacitated. Yes, next. Okay, nurturing support to disabled people organization. PPF supported Pakistan Foundation for Fighting Blindness. This organization was earlier focusing, working only with in Islamabad and Rawalpindi, which is the capital city and the adjoining city of Pakistan. But PPF has expanded its outreach to reach out to the remote areas such as in Multan, Peshawar, and Lahore to provide support to visually impaired people, and 8,000 visually challenged persons benefited from this initiative. Next. PPF also supported Family Educational Services Foundation in development of sign language booklet that directly benefited 5,000 children with hearing impairments. In addition, deaf research schools and training centers in different cities of Sindh were also supported with professional development training and teaching staff and skills development and vocational training to help hearing impaired children to have these functional skills. Next. Okay, now the cumulative impact of mainstreaming of PWDs in poverty graduation strategies have resulted PWDs to set up their own enterprises. We have anecdotal evidences, and in different progress reports, it has been reported that people with disabilities in different under different programs in different areas have set up their own enterprises, and also they have moved up from one band of poverty score to the next level, which I have already explained. And earlier, they were the people with disability. They used to depend on social safety net, but this poverty graduation support has and the mainstreaming in PPF's program has helped them to be economically self-reliant, and they become less reliant on social safety nets. And they also, some of the PWDs, people with disability, also become source of inspiration for other PWDs, and other PWDs also got encouragement to get involved in the income generation activities. And PWDs also were practically involved in union council and village development planning. That also increased their voices and concerns in the village development planning process. Next. Okay. As a result of improvement of community physical infrastructure, as well as awareness campaigns and provision of assistive devices to people with disability, they have also, their access to health and education facilities has considerably increased in the target areas of PPF. And in addition, social visibility of people with disability has also significantly increased in their communities. That improved their self-confidence and morale, and as well as self-esteem. And last but not least, people with disability and their families and their communities also realized that the people with disability also have potential and their rights to be main part of the mainstream society and to be part of income generation activities. Next. Okay, we are also now planning to have quantified impact through research, and we have an ongoing research on cash versus transfer that is being led by Dr. Imran Rasool from University College of London, and we are trying to get disaggregated data related how program interventions have impacted on people with disability, with having different categories of disability in different age group in different regions. And we are also planning to have all the future evaluations and research focusing to have disaggregated data related to results and impacts on people with disability. Okay, I'll just briefly highlight the key challenges. One of the first and foremost challenge is that on national level we don't have database available that can help us to provide in which region how many people with disability having which functional abilities and which age group are available. So we don't have such data available with any agency. But to have exclusive data collection exercise of such type, it's a very expensive and resource intensive and time consuming exercise. So as a coping strategy, what PPF is doing to embed and integrate questions related to people with disability in the ongoing baseline and gap studies and other research questions. The other issue is that the public and private infrastructure and facilities, especially in the rural areas, they are not inclusive, and they which is limiting the inclusion of people with disabilities, especially to access to health, education, and market opportunities. Next. Okay. And another issue is that lack of trained sector-specific human resource. For instance, in the market to ensure inclusion in the program cycles at all levels. For instance, if we and this is not challenge faced by PPF, but other organizations, other development agencies as well, that if we are going to design a community physical infrastructure project to ensure inclusion of people with disability, we will be having very limited number of civil engineers who have understanding and comprehension of the needs and of people with disability, as well as the design and structural design requirements to make that infrastructure inclusive. That's one example. And same goes with the health experts and livestock experts and agriculture experts. So in different sectors, we have very less number of trained human resource who understand the needs and the requirements of people with disability and how those needs and requirements can be embedded in the program and activities and interventions. And just to mention that we have recently received a Diversity and Inclusion Achievement Awards by Global SHRM Forum. And thank you very much. If you have any question, I would welcome.
Thank you, Mohammed, and thank you to all the previous panelists for all these excellent presentations. We will now take some questions from either the web chat, or if some of our participants could just quickly jump in if they have some particular questions, or raise their hands as well. But before we take these questions, we will first give the floor to the panelists. Just one first question is, what are some of the persisting gaps from the existing research on adapting graduation to people with disabilities?
Okay.
So any of
Melissa?
our panelists could answer.
Melissa? Okay.
Yes?
Can I add? I think there are two gaps. One is the availability of specific data related to people with disabilities. In different age groups, having different categories, and then having different functional abilities in different regions. We don't have that specific data available at any level. That I have already mentioned. And the second issue is the researchers. Most of the researchers, they are also unfortunately not inclusive. They have categorization in terms of, they have disaggregated data in terms of gender, male or female, but we have seen almost all the studies in Pakistan, be it on nutrition or health or education or water and sanitation, most of them, they are silent about people with disability. So I think the researchers also need to be sensitized. They seem to be lacking that sensitization to mainstream people with disability in the research.
Thank you, Mohammed. Would love to hear from our colleagues from Trickle Up or from Fonkoze as well, as in regards to some of these persisting gaps in the research.
Okay. I think that at Trickle Up, we are still working in every project on how to include better people with disabilities. Maybe some of our remaining difficulties are how to adapt the training material and the coaching to people with different kind of disabilities. For example, in rural areas, people with hearing disabilities don't know the sign language, so it's very difficult to train them. So we had to involve other people from the family, the caregivers, and also we have to we are adapting our tools between the different target population, but I think we can still improve in that topic to adapt the tools and tools for people with disabilities, which are direct participants, versus tools for their caregivers. And when you are working with a caregiver, how can you make sure the people with disabilities are really involved, even if they are children? You have to involve them, make them participating in the groups, and make them interacting with other people. So I think these questions are still, it's still necessary to deep them. And yeah, that's what I mean.
Thank you, Flory. We know that the context of Haiti is a very particular one. So Stephen and Hébert, if you could kindly share some of those remaining gaps from the research as well. Stephen, Hébert, are you muted? Well, one other question I'd say that sort of came up from the different presentations, and particularly from the presentation on Stephen's presentation on Haiti, and also Mohammed's presentation on Pakistan, is the issue of the absence of national baseline database. And so, in light of the absence of this national baseline database on people with disabilities, how do all your respective organizations set program targets for performance benchmarks in order to measure program changes?
Okay, I can say a few things about it's very challenging on two sides. On the one hand, we found that it's not easy on the front end to really evaluate if someone actually is disabled or what that means. So we ended up working, I'll give two examples. We ended up working with one young man whose only, physical handicap was that he was missing an eye because of an early accident. But that was really disabling him in the sense that socially and psychologically, he was unable to integrate himself into the life of his community. He felt himself unable to work. And but if you talk to him at the end of the program and ask him whether he was disabled, he would tell you, I thought I was, but I'm not. We had another example of someone whose only was that he had a very, very badly broken leg that had never received proper medical attention. And so within a few months, it was something that was able to heal. That wasn't really a disability, but we felt we had to address it given his level of poverty and the fact that there was no one else there to address it, no other resource targeting him. So in the field where we operate, we think it's very hard to set very, very clear and inflexible guidelines. On the other hand, when you're judging the success of the program, or when you're judging what people should achieve, it's also very difficult because we end up selecting people who range from those to whom our standard graduation criteria can apply very well. Either they are themselves able to manage their assets and their lives, or they're able to manage a group of people in their surroundings who do the actual physical labor for them. We have, on the other hand, people who we think of as having been successes in the program in a sense, even though they never really would have met the graduation criteria. I'm thinking of someone who is almost entirely paralyzed, but because we were able to facilitate social inclusion, and because we were able to work with him and his family, he went from spending his whole life in a small, dark, windowless hut to going out in front of the hut every day and participating in the life of the community as it went back and forth on the road in front of his house. In a way, that's not what graduation typically is, but to us it seemed like a great success. So it's hard to be as clear as one would like to be about these things.
Indeed, it is a bit of a challenge, and that brings to mind the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, and just wondering if there has been any particular efforts to create these sort of programs that are really helping these people cope.
Yes. Well, after the earthquake, we had in Haiti various organizations, international organizations, who did a lot of effort to bring services or materials for people with disabilities. And 4 or 5 years after, they all disappeared. And now what we have some effort from the government, but they are merely concentrated in the rural and in the urban area. So people with disability in the countryside, even many of those people who had a type of disability in the earthquake, most of them get back to the countryside because they are really afraid of living in Port-au-Prince or in the city where they have been affected. But a systematic effort to target them and include them in a certain program or social protection program. But it's still challenging for people who live in the countryside with a disability.
Indeed, thank you, Hébert. We're now taking some. Thank you to all the panelists. This is really excellent. We're now taking some questions from the web chat. We have one question from Uzma Nomani and from PPAF. And the question is, what skills did the people have who interacted so closely with people with disabilities, and what was their education background, and whether Trickle Up trained them first? This question is for Flory, our colleague from Trickle Up.
Okay. Thank you for the question. As I started writing in the chat, we work with NGOs who before didn't have any experience working with people with disabilities, and the field agents didn't have any experience neither. So we discovered it's possible to train the field agents to work with people with disabilities. And for that, we asked for some support of some specialized organizations. Here in Guatemala, we work with Silvia Juan from El Collective, and also the NGO called CBM, and they trained ourselves and the field agents. So maybe the field agents need to be more empathic. They need empathy, and they need to be very open-minded. I think that when you are working with extreme poor people, you can be faced with some difficult situations, but if you are working with people with disabilities in extreme poverty, it can be more difficult. So they need that human skills. And then we used to work with some technical profile based on the project and the needs of the project. But it's not, it's really something you can build on. It's not necessary to find specialists when you decide to start working with people with disabilities. Well, you will need specialists to support you, but you don't need field agents, specialist field agents. They can learn during the project. That's our idea.
Thank you, Flory. Now we're opening up the floor. Please, if you have any questions, please do either raise your hand or please do ask your questions directly to the panelists. You would have to unmute yourself should you want to ask directly your questions.
Hello?
Yes, hello. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Amadeus Kamageng from Tanzania. Firstly, I want to congratulate the presenters for sharing this very, very useful experience, which is very relevant to Tanzania. I have a question, if you could get experience on the cost. As soon as people with disabilities are mainstreamed in the program, say safety net, if you could get some feedback on the cost, how does the program cost change? If you can get some experience, significant, at least feedback on the cost, changes on the cost. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amadeus, for your question. We'll pass it on to the panelists.
I can propose some answer. I think that, well, it's also linked with the question Old was having about how to work with people with disabilities in inclusive project or only with people with disabilities. Because, of course, when you are making project only for people with disabilities, your costs will be higher because you will have more dispersion of the participants. So that means you will have, the field agents will have to mobilize themselves far from, well, each participant will be far away from the others. But if you are working in an inclusive project, including people with disabilities and women or young women all together, it will be easier to create groups and to find people closely. So then another answer I will make is, in our experience, it was important to include another part in the budget to attend health emergency and coordinations, because we found a lot of problem in health with people with disabilities and children with disabilities, and this was something not so common with women, for example. So this is something you should include in your budget to increase it.
Yeah, I would just say, in our experience, that's exactly right. But just as a matter of fact, we do not let our budget be affected in the programs where we integrate persons with disabilities. we've found so far that our regular budget is able to cover the relatively small percentage of people that we end up finding. As Flory says, working with them separately is much more expensive.
Thank you, Stephen and Hébert. Do our colleagues from PPAF have any particular take on this question?
Yeah, I would just add and second that inclusive programming is cost efficient as per our experience, and also it helps to engage other stakeholders. It's not only PPF that takes on the burden, but other stakeholders from community institutions to partner organizations to other government agencies. They are also involved in this inclusive process. And last but not least, the impact is more lasting if we go for inclusive programming. PPF has experience of having targeted program with and exclusive program with people with disabilities back in 2006 and 2007, and we had provided medical assistance and assistive devices and trainings and independent living training to more than 50,000 people with disabilities in different parts of the country. But eventually we realized that this may not be more sustainable, and this may not have a lasting impact. And on top of it, it's also not cost effective. Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much to our panelists, and thank you again, Mr. Kanagenge, for this excellent question. We have one question from Martine Levesque, who is from Plan International Bolivia. Martine, please do ask your question directly to the panelists.
Good morning, all. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay. I'm Martine Levesque, the director of Handicap International. I heard you say Plan International?
My apologies. Yes.
Okay. It's Handicap International, working in the Andean region, which includes Paraguay, Bolivia, Peru, and Ecuador. In this region, our organization is just starting working on the graduation approach, but we do have quite an in-depth experience with the model in Asia. My question, first of all, I'd like to thank all the presenters. My question is about liking to hear about a little bit more about experiences working with governments. I know in this region we have the experience with Paraguay, and I'd like to see how other countries, other experiences have seen how the government has shifted from traditional medical approaches on working only on social safety nets. We can help make the shift to graduation approach. It's our experience here in Bolivia that the government is more focused on the safety, social safety nets, and we believe we would like to help support a shift to graduation approach. So, are there other experiences worldwide that would speak to that? Thank you very much for the reply.
Thank you, Martine.
Thank you, Martin, for your question. I can speak about our experience with Nicaragua project and the National Social Protection Program for people with disabilities. Actually, this program in Nicaragua was led by the Health Ministry. So I think that's one of our barriers at the beginning, because we were working with doctors, medical teams, and the first barriers were them having that medical approach. So part of our effort was always remind them the social approach, and the CBM was working deeply in that with that intention. Here in Guatemala, we work mainly with municipal governments because it's very difficult to achieve some alliance with the national government, the national level. So here in Guatemala, as the municipal governments do not use to work with people with disabilities, and in many municipalities we are starting with them, working with people with disabilities. So it's easier in some way because you can give some orientation about the kind of approach which is better. So we start with them with the social approach and leave behind the medical approach. So that's my answer for the moment.
Thank you, Flory. We'd like to hear from our colleagues from Fonkoze and from PPAF.
Yes, Melissa. In Pakistan, the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Human Rights, they are working with people with disability. They have their own national programs. But in relation to social safety net, Government of Pakistan has a Benazir income support program, and this is basically for ultra poor, and this is for all groups, including people with disability. And since PPF and Benazir income support program, both of these programs, they work through Ministry of Finance. So we had the opportunity to closely work with each other and have discussions with each other. Earlier, Benazir income support program was only focusing on providing cash assistance to ultra poor, including people with disability. But after seeing the impact of our poverty graduation strategy, PPF's poverty graduation strategy, now Benazir income support program is also moving towards providing this income support for enterprise development, for livelihood and productive income generation, income supplementation activities. So somehow this income social safety net program by Pakistan, which is also inclusive for people with disability, is now moving towards poverty graduation. Thank you.
Well, in Haiti, the social protection is not really clear and systematic. So it's hard to make the shift because the system is not really effective and not systematic. What we are doing right now is we are working in a way to advocate to see how we can that the graduation approach can really help people to get out of extreme poverty. And we are just in the process with some partners like IDS and University of Quisqueya and some other partners to see how we can together show the evidence that the graduation approach can be benefit for people in extreme poverty. But in Haiti, we are at the very beginning step to work for that shift. Thank you.
Thank you, Hubert. Would like to hear from our colleagues from PPAF as well.
Melissa, I have already told that Government of Pakistan is having a social safety net program, Benazir income support program, which is inclusive of people with disability. Earlier, they were just providing cash assistance to ultra poor and poor households, having a poverty scorecard 0 to 19. But since Benazir Income Support Program also works with Ministry of Finance and PPF also works with Ministry of Finance, so we had opportunity to work closely with each other. And once we demonstrated our poverty graduation strategy and its impact to Benazir Income Support Program, now Benazir Income Support Program, this is a government social safety net protection program. They are also moving their program towards poverty graduation through income supplementation activities, so cash transfer for income generation activities.
Thank you, Mohammed. We'll have one more question from Paulina. Paulina, if you could kindly unmute yourself and please do ask your question to the panelists. Paulina, if you're muted, please do unmute yourself. In the meantime, if there are other questions from our webinar.
Yes, I have a question. Hello,
yes,
Melissa?
please. Yes.
Can I proceed?
Yes, you may.
Yes, I have two more questions. One, because we are looking at graduation and in relation with people with disability, if we could get experience in terms of time, when we look at other participants in the program, other people, other families in the program, and those people with disability, looking at the time that they take to graduate out of poverty, whether there are some significant differences. If you can get some feedback on that. But another question, particularly looking at the case of Pakistan PPF, the interventions that people with disability undertake, if you could get experience on identification of these activities, so that when they are undertaking implementation, it should not bring more trouble or difficult to people with disabilities, if there are some experiences also on this area, the types of interventions or activities that they do, but also on the time difference comparing with other participants in the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amadeus. I'll have our panelists would like to tackle this question.
Thank you, Amadeus, for this question. What I can tell you is, for example, targeting people with disabilities and making sure they agree to participate in the program is longer. It takes more time. Sometimes you need to visit the household, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 times to make sure that we agree, because of the same discrimination they used to face, or isolation conditions, or the lack of self-confidence they have. So this, for us, this component was longer than with other target groups. And about targeting out of poverty, it depends on your goals, on your targets. But yeah, the time is also longer, because you will face more barriers than with other target groups. So in our experience, it was better to add 6 months at least, whereas in comparison with other target groups.
Well, can I?
Sure, please go ahead, Hébert. Please just, if you could kindly just speak closer to the mic so we can hear you more clearly.
Okay, I'll do that. So in our program, there's no systematic difference between people without and disabilities. They all take 18 months to graduate, and the results are not really different. So, as Stephen said in his presentation, that was a surprise to us because we thought that we should design other activities for those people, but what we discovered, this approach work with few adaptations for those families. There's no systematic difference between in working with those people and with disability and a regular member without any disability.
Thank you, Hébert. I'd like to know if our colleagues from PPAF would like to also present their own view on the matter.
Yeah, I would just add that we just have, normally we have 3 to 5 years program period, but we have not separately classified the time period of poverty graduation for people with disability and other population groups. So it's, but it's understandable that it takes more time for people with disability to graduate out of poverty because we have to create enabling environment for them and have to tackle and address the social barriers which are deeply entrenched in our society and culture and tradition. So it takes more time to work with people with disability as compared to the other population group. Regarding the types of interventions with people with disability, we have under livelihood, we have asset transfer, productive asset transfer. It depends what type of people with disability our target beneficiary has, and then we customize our assets transfer accordingly. This may include transfer of livestock, which most of the people with disability can manage. And then also vocational skills training, which may include tailoring, and it again depends upon the type of disability our target beneficiaries have. Tailoring, electrician, plumbing, welding, and other construction trade training skills. And then also micro enterprise development. We have seen many people with disabilities running their own small grocery shops at village and community level, and we have been able to support them with some cash transfer to set up their own enterprises, supplemented with enterprise development training and business and market linkage development facilitation. So these are the types of livelihood interventions we do, but it depends upon the type of disabilities our target beneficiaries have. Thank you.
Thank you. At the moment, if anyone has any burning question that they would want to ask the panelists, now is the time. Please do unmute yourself, and you can ask directly. I see we have a colleague from who's joined, Wanjiku. If you could kindly unmute yourself and please do ask your question.
Hi, Melissa and the others, the panelists from PPAF. Thank you for sharing your experience. I'm interested to just find out through when you're sharing how the sequencing of activities goes. There were birds of, did you call them poverty birds, that you work with at different for the different activities. I was wondering how that transition across the continuum is when you start from like what you just talked about, the cash transfers, and then later on you said they transition into accessing loans from other institutions. How does that affect their participation, or what do you see?
I'm sorry, may I ask you to rephrase your question? I understand that how we sequence our activities at different poverty band level.
Yes.
But
and there's a moment in time where you do like the cash transfers you just talked about, and then later on there is a place where you start accessing loans from other institutions.
Oh yes.
I wanted to hear what your experience has been in terms of their participation levels, or what happens across that continuum, and is this an indication of how the change has been in their own probably social identity, that early alone they feel they can only do with the cash transfer, and at the end they are able to access loans? Just wanted to feel what your experience is across that transition.
Yeah, I think as compared to people who are not having any kind of disability but still relying on social protection programs, we have observed that people with disability, they feel more motivated and feel more encouraged to move from this social safety, social protection program to self-reliance, to have their own control on economic resources. Whereas the other population group, if they are receiving free cash transfer, ultra poor, especially the ultra poor, free cash transfer, they are more complacent to continue receiving this. But we have seen people with disability, they actively participate, and they want to move out of this social barrier and social stigma which is generally considered that people with disability, they can't participate in livelihood interventions. So we have experienced that they have higher level of motivation and higher sense of self-esteem. And in terms of tracking, we are now moving towards this poverty graduation tracking method, and we, in our midterm evaluations and our end evaluations, we are putting the poverty scorecard related questions are embedded in all of our baselines and midlines and end lines. So this change in poverty scorecard helps us to understand that what percentage of population has moved from this band to the next band. And as I said earlier, people with disability are already inclusive of this poverty graduation approach. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thanks for sharing.
Can I go ahead with my question?
Yes. Hello, Maxine? Yes, please.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for this second opportunity to ask a question. I'd like to hear more about the experiences working with women with disabilities that are obviously amongst the poorest, the extremely poor people, and also mothers with disabilities. It's our experience here. We do work with a lot of women with disabilities that are also mothers, and I'd like to know more about experiences with dependents and families, because it's definitely a reality for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Martine. I'd like to see if the panelists would like to tackle this question.
About as to working with women, our program was so exclusively focused on working with women before we started working with persons with disabilities that the women with disabilities hardly even seemed to us to be a separate category. They were just a part of the population that we felt responsible for working with. And I don't think there was any clear difference between the women in our program for those with disabilities and the men, either in the range of disabilities they had or in the results. We just worked with them. The thing I'm noticing, though, as we hear these questions is that the way Ava and I are inclined to answer them is very much affected by the fact that we're a small organization working very closely with the people who are our target population, so that for us, when we hear questions about certain categories of people, we're much more inclined to think of individual cases than thinks about the group who are women or the group who are have vision issues. I don't know if that makes sense, but we don't yet have enough experience, or we're not yet dealing with enough numbers, or not far enough from the field to have kind of an overall picture. For us, it's always there's always an immediacy of the intervention with each individual. That's what takes precedence for us, and that's what's most on our mind.
I would like to add something. Indeed, I think that working with people with disabilities means to be conscious about other kind of barriers, but when you're working with women or indigenous women with disabilities, you have plenty of barriers to address. And one of the main problems we have seen with women with disabilities is that they are more vulnerable to sexual violence. And we found that plenty of women with disabilities and with different kinds of disabilities, hearing, intellectual, psychosocial disabilities, had a problem before the project when, for example, once they had some violence when they go out because they are more vulnerable. So this is a topic to be addressed. I think it's something to be considered when you are designing a project with women with disabilities. You have to take into account if they have to walk away from the house to make sure they can be safe enough. And the same when they have to go to the saving group, maybe making sure you can create some groups and they can go all together to the meeting in order to avoid the woman with disability to be alone working in the community. That's part of our experience to avoid that kind of condition. And sometimes it could require some psychological support for these women.
Thank you, Flori. Just to add one more thing, I do agree on the higher levels of sexual violence. It's our experience here in Bolivia, but also physical violence. We have lots of cases of women here who have a disability or higher level of disability as a result of violence. So it's definitely an issue, a point that we need to take into consideration while working with women with disability. Violence is there, and we need to tackle that issue. And it's not a Bolivian issue. I don't want to make it more emphasis on Bolivia. It's it's a worldwide issue for women in general, and even more for women with disabilities. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everyone. I wanted to, Melissa, if you give me the green light, I wanted to take a few minutes to wrap up.
Sure. Just wanting to add, really thank you everyone for all these excellent questions. Unfortunately, because of the time, we need to wrap up, and my colleague Aude de Montesquieu will be proceeding. Aude, over to you.
Yeah, no, I really wanted to say that this was a fascinating discussion, and I was just actively taking notes here, and really excited to hear the level of experience and technical input from everyone. It was really striking to me to remind ourselves that, when we started some of these pilots, the targeting criteria for participants was the able-bodied person. Just everyone's intervention reminded us how narrow that was, and that, if we wanted to be tackling extreme poverty, we had to recognize that many of the extreme poor had disabilities, and a very large number of people with disabilities were extreme poor, so that we really needed to correct this misconception. I was really interested to hear, and let me just kind of summarize here some of the things I heard on design. It was interesting to hear, especially from Fonkoze in Haiti, that they saw no need for specific design changes from the general graduation program, and that this came as a surprise for them. And I had Hébert say, the actual graduation model in and of itself works quite well for this group. However, there were some interventions on specific tweaks and adjustments needed. We had Trickle Up say that an additional 6 months was important to add as compared to people with no disabilities. PPAF suggested that people with disabilities needed more work on the question of social exclusion in particular. At PPAF also, there was a question about needing more inclusion of other household members, which I thought was a very important idea. I also at PPAF, there was an interesting note to counterbalance the need for extra time. There was a remark about people with disabilities sometimes being faster climbers than people without disabilities. The people were more driven, more motivated as soon as they were given an opportunity. I had some interesting reminders about the need to adapt saving services to this kind of group, especially with, the physical mobility being a problem and people needing roving deposit collectors or savings collection at the doorstep. And then, of course, the need to carefully think through the asset transfer package in order to make sure that the livelihood is one that can be done by people with disabilities. And typically, PPAF was saying livestock works well, tailoring, small grocery shops, etc. There were some interesting comments by Trickle Up about, at the system level, what you need to address this client group. You need to hire staff with particularly high empathy, and there was a remark about how it's difficult to hire this type of person at scale. Fonkoze said, and PPAF also said, it was very important to have an excellent knowledge of what were the government interventions available for this client group, and to have a solid scan of what you could build on in terms of healthcare, in terms of disability support programs, crutches, wheelchairs, etc., that Fonkoze was talking about. And last but not least, I think there were, three big questions, moving forward. One is this question of costs, and especially as you tailor, adjust, make the program longer for this client group, how is that reflected in costs, and how do you understand this cost question as a cost relative to what? As Michael Felix was saying in the chat box, the question is not so much how much does it cost, but how much does it cost versus other things we might be doing for people with disabilities. Then, there was a remark about the need for more impact, more detailed knowledge of what is the specific impact to this group, especially in order to answer that question of cost effectiveness. And then finally, of course, Flori was just saying we need to better segment this group. People with disabilities, is a subgroup, but they're actually not a homogeneous subgroup. It goes from the person with a bullet in their leg that, that Haiti was mentioning, from the people who suffer from sexual and gender-based violence in Latin America, or other physical and psychosocial disabilities in Pakistan. So we need more experience and more nuanced segmentation to better understand who this works for and who does it not work so well for. So thanks a lot. I'm just conscious of time. These are the final words. I just wanted to thank you all for this really interesting deep dive on a sub-segment, and we'll be continuing these deep dives in another series of webinars. The next coming up will be on refugees and internally displaced people next week. Thanks again for your participation. Goodbye.
Thank you, Aude. And again, I echo your thanks. Really, thank you to all the panelists and to all who have joined today. And as mentioned before, we will be sharing the PowerPoints and the recording in the following days. Thank you again.
Thank you.